Welcome to part 3 of Race and Rally into 2021. Today we'll be speaking to another 3 race organisers as well as Hugh Chambers from Motorsport UK. But first up, let's go over to France to talk to Flavien and Vanessa about their series, the GT and Sports Car Cup, which recently picked up the RAC Award for Best Race Series.
Hello Sarah, thanks for inviting us to join you to talk about the GT and Sports Car Cup, a race series that Flavien and I created back in 2007. Some 15 seasons ago now. The series is for pre-66 GT and pre-63 sports cars run to Appendix K specification, and I'll hand you over to Flavien, who will talk about eligibility and our season ahead.
Good evening, Sarah. The GT and Sports Car Cup is for cars which ran in the World Endurance Championship in period, and as Vanessa said, to Appendix K, to period specifications and with current valid HTP. Our races range from 1 to 2 hours with 1 to 2 mandatory pit stops depending on their length. We usually run 4 rounds a year, and this year we will start our season at Silverstone during the International Trophy organised on the full Grand Prix circuit by the HSCC on the 23rd of May. We will celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Jaguar E-Type. We will then go to the Nürburgring for the first time in the history of the GT and Sports Car Cup, where we will hold a 65-minute race on the modern Formula One circuit, together with a 60-minute demonstration on the fabulous Nordschleife. This will be a very special opportunity to run the racing cars entered in the GT and Sports Car Cup during an exclusive and dedicated demonstration at a really good pace. The drivers should be able to cover 5 to 6 laps within 1 hour. We will then return to Castle Combe for the great autumn classic on the first Saturday of October and organise our traditional end of season round at Portimao during the Algarve Classic Festival on the last weekend of October in the sunshine in Portugal.
Sarah, you asked us how we coped last year with COVID and the restrictions. As many of you know, we had to cancel 2 of the 4 rounds that we held and kept the 2 UK rounds to be absolutely sure that we kept within regulations. There were social distancing aspects, we were wearing masks in the pit lane and paddocks, but the ambience was second to none and there was such an appetite for people to go racing. So we had pretty full grids at both Thruxton and Castle Combe. And actually, at the end of the season, the GT and Sports Car Cup was awarded the Royal Automobile Club Historic Race Series of the Year, which is a huge accolade for the series. We're incredibly proud to have received this. This was for the superb competitive spirit on the circuit and the quality of cars that we have on our grids. And this really was, thanks to our drivers and the drivers out there that helped to make the GT and Sports Car Cup the very best of what it is today. With regards to the pandemic and Brexit going forward this season, the pandemic now with the rollout of vaccines in the UK is hopefully moving to the next stage where the world will open up with regard to travel and being able to be a little bit freer. We don't envisage that this year we'll be able to return to the same hospitality situation that we have in the series, where we have a great conviviality atmosphere within a dedicated hospitality area. With regards to social distancing, but we will do what we can to make sure that spirit lives throughout the paddock for sure. Brexit, on the other hand, is going to be a little bit of a challenge. We have 2 rounds outside the UK this season. There is a new system of a carnet for cars going abroad. This will add slightly extra added expense to the racing budget, and we're working very hard with the FIA and MUK to ensure that the bureaucracy, the paperwork, and this process is taken care of as easily and smoothly as possible going forward. Do all of you take a look at our gtandsportscarcup.com website. It'll give you far more information about the rounds that we're taking place at this year, give you an idea of the cars that run with us, and we very much look forward to seeing you all back on track very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks very much for that, Vanessa and Flavien. I have to say, watching that, I was getting serious book collection envy. Next up is Duncan Wiltshire from Motor Racing Legends. I spoke to him early last week and asked him how the business was coping after a year of COVID.
Yeah, so the world of motor racing legends is actually in remarkably rude health. I'm pleased to say. I mean, quite remarkably so, given what we've been through in the last 12 months. But the real thing I think that got us through last year, or got us to that point, was three things. Very, very fortunate. The first was that our sponsors sat with us all through the year. They were very, very good, never flinched, kept their support right the way through, and eternally grateful to all of them for that. We'd launched at the beginning of the year, by complete chance, we'd launched the Motor Racing Legends Club. And the whole point of the club is to a way of building a bigger sense of community amongst our racers, not just around the racetracks, but around lots of other events that we could be doing. And all the lovely plans that we thought about kicking off in 2020, of course, all went by the wayside. But at the most basic level, to be really simplistic, the good news is it brought in some much needed revenue. And the third strand is that we have a good number of racers who every year will sign up for the season and pay up front for the racing. And to be really candid, those three strands together were a lifesaver for us. We went into lockdown in actually a very healthy position, and I'm very grateful to everyone concerned for helping to get us through it.
So what have we got in store for this year?
That October meeting gave us the fabulous opportunity to try some new ideas that would have been far too wacky and far too risky to have tried in normal times. And the most obvious of which was the success of that 3-hour race. It was only ever meant to be a one-off, just in reaction to Spa not happening. But before the race had even finished, the competitors were coming up saying, "You've just got to do this again." So we've launched under the banner of the Royal Automobile Club Pall Mall Cup. We're going to run 2 3-hour races this year. We've got one coming up at the Donington Historic Festival beginning of May, and at Silverstone at the end of October. And that's very exciting. That again, hugely supported by DK Engineering. The other thing that came out of that conversation with DK Engineering, all those conversations, was another grand idea that got us all really, really excited, and that's the Amon Cup for GT40s, a one-make series just for Ford GT40s, built up to a pre-66 spec. Amon Cup, of course, named after the great Chris Amon, F1 racer, but more significantly GT40 racer, winner of Le Mans. And the Amon family have been fabulously supportive of this whole enterprise. Alex Amon, Chris's son in particular, been hugely supportive, and we're very hopeful that the family are going to be attending the racetracks. I have to say that the prospect of a grid full of GT40s is extremely exciting.
So just to clarify, so the GT40 Cup is purely because they are not allowed to enter into the 3-hour race. Is that right?
It's not. It came from that discussion. It's not because they're excluded. The Pall Mall Cup is for pre-66 GT cars, GT and GTS, and touring cars and 50 sports cars. GTPs, prototypes, are not allowed in the Pall Mall Cup. There's a very deliberate decision to keep the performance relatively level throughout the grid. But absolutely, from that conversation came the realization that all these GT40s, which outside of the Spa 6 hours, really have nowhere to race. And rather than put on a grid into which the GT40s could run, we thought, why not do a grid exclusively for GT40s? And that's what we're going to do. And the support's looking great. It's looking very exciting, I have to say. Can't wait for it.
There's a team element to the Pall Mall Cup. Can you explain that?
There are 2 elements to the Pall Mall Cup in terms of trophies. You've obviously got the overall awards and the class structure that goes behind that. And but on top of that, the actual Pall Mall Cup itself is going to be presented to the winning team. And this was a format that we made up in October, to be honest. Nothing better than that. And it worked so incredibly well first time out. We're just going to repeat it. The teams are made up of teams of 3 cars. Each car must be from a different class. And so it's not just about your own performance. It's about all of your teammates have got to get through to win. And one of the things we found in October was that the teams that you really thought were in with a great chance, in the end, didn't do as well as they might have done. And the winners' rostrum from October was really varied and spread the love well through the pack, which was perfect.
Yeah,
so really, it's the team prize that really matters more than overall.
So Donington Historic Festival, your first meeting, which is set to go ahead, and how are entries looking for that? What's it going to look like?
Yeah, Donington Historic Festival coming up 1st and 2nd of May. We're very conscious that we're still within the restrictions of the pandemic restrictions, although they're starting to ease. I'm really pleased to say that despite all of that, the entries are coming in thick and fast. We're logging multiple entries every day for all of the grids. Really, really excited. I mean, I have to say, head and shoulders, Pall Mall Cup is well on its way to being full already, which has caused us quite a surprise. But all of the grids are doing really, really well. Yes, we're fielding queries about details, but fundamentally, the event's going ahead, no question, that's been confirmed. And with no exceptions, the grids are looking fantastic. The one grid that I think is worth pointing out, in particular, it's a new grid to us, although it's been around for a very long time. We were approached last summer by Jaguar to take on responsibility for the Jaguar Classic Challenge. And so Donington Historic Festival this year will be the first time that series is run under our stewardship. We're extremely excited. We're very privileged to be asked to take the series on. And I'm also, there's a degree of nervousness that we've got a lot to live up to. It's a fantastic series. It's been very well supported over the years. And I'm really pleased to say that we're getting really terrific support. In terms of the entries in so far, it's right up there, just behind the Pall Mall Cup for support. So again, another series that bodes well. But I have to say, it's true of all the series. The Woodcote Trophy, Stirling Moss Trophy, looking fantastic. Touring cars looking really very, very good indeed for the Historic Touring Car Challenge and the Tony John Trophy, and the 60s Touring Car Challenge, New 2TC, which will run with them. So it's a broad field, but it's going to be a really big, packed field. Of course, the most important grid of all is the pre-war sports cars. And again, I'm no doubt we'll get a really good turnout for that. They're always very slow coming out the book, the pre-war boys, but I have every faith in them. So really, really looking forward to Donington. Very important meeting.
What about do we know any of the details yet? Do you know if we're going to be allowed spectators?
Yeah, the plan for Donington is that the expectation, I mean, everything's very fluid, and I think until we get there, we won't know for certain. Our expectation is that Donington will be open to the public to some extent. Now, I must stress that, you check on the website, as they always say, because things can change, but it is my expectation that the public will be allowed to attend the Donington Historic Festival. Having said that, it is also my expectation that they will be restricted to what they call the non-working areas. So the public will not be allowed into the paddock. I suspect they'll be restricted to the outfield. But it doesn't matter. We're all talking about racing drivers can't wait to get out there. We've got to remember that the public have been denied this spectacle as well. So there's a huge demand from the public to be allowed into the spectacle. So even if they've got to stay on the outside, they won't care. It'll be fantastic to see them. And, there's no substitute for racing in front of a live audience.
So we know hotels are open to those who are officially working or whose racing is working. And presumably you're going to let competitors camp in the paddock. That's all allowed.
Yeah, it's another one of those grey areas. With regards to accommodation, there's no self-catering accommodation. Absolutely no question. There's no grey area about that. So motorhomes in the paddock. If you want to tent in the paddock, if you can find some grass, you're perfectly entitled to do that. I think Airbnb accommodation, self-catering accommodation is perfectly okay. So when it comes to hotels, that is a bit of an anomaly. You're absolutely right, Sarah, when you say that work is a legitimate claim. Of course, for all the preparers and a lot of the teams, that's a very easy box to tick. The debate I think that each owner's got to have is they can declare themselves as working. That would be my suggestion. But I think everybody has to take that on their own advice, as it were.
So it's all going to look quite different, but I'm with everyone else. I'm just excited to get out there and get driving again. So we'll put up with.
I think the experience for the drivers is going to be very similar to the experience we had at Thruxton last summer, where for anyone who was there, remember this as a driver. Again, the public were allowed in to the event back in August, but they weren't allowed into the paddock. The other point to just mention there, which I'm sure will happen again, is the drivers were not allowed out into the public area, so they weren't allowed to mingle. That didn't matter at all. We had the benefit of a live show, but also there was always, in a rather charming way, there was that sense of a private party at the same time. So that really worked. We will still be catering for all of our drivers. We'll do. We're planning to do, as we did at Thruxton, a kind of takeaway, hamper, and we'll put in some facilities where people can sit, socially distanced, of course. So we'll make sure everyone's looked after and not abandoned at the meeting. But unfortunately, we won't be able to do our full-blown hospitality and all the social mingling. But we'll find a way of doing a happy hour somehow.
All important happy hour, absolutely. But the briefings, the scrutineering via self-declaration was a brilliant thing last year, and hopefully that's here to stay.
Yeah, the self-declaration, the driver's sign-on, I think we all expect that to stay forever. And I have to say that I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that if we can do away with the queues for drivers signing on first thing in the morning, I don't think any of us are going to shed any tears over that. Scrutineering is an interesting one, no question. For the time being, it is going to be down to self-declaration. Scrutineering longer term, I think that there's just a few alarm bells in the back of my mind about how scrutineering goes forward, because I can see pressure remaining for us to stick with the self-declaration system. And the problem is, whilst undoubtedly 99.999% of racing drivers and racing teams never cheat and would never dream of cheating, there's always the 0.0001% who might just be tempted to push the boundary a bit. And the challenge for the scrutineers is to make sure that doesn't happen. And of course, the harder it is for the scrutineers to get access to the cars, then the easier it is for people who feel they can interpret the rules in a more flexible way. And that's something that we've got to find a solution to going forward, because I wouldn't be surprised if we have pressure put on us from the circuits to see a virtual scrutineering remain for the future, long after all these problems have cleared up. If for no other reason than it's cheaper. And good scrutineers do not grow on trees. That's the other problem.
So worst case scenario then, if lockdown returns and we all go back down to no racing, what have you got anything to say about refunds or entries that are piling in at the moment? We've said all along, if any of these events are cancelled for whatever reason to do with COVID, then we will give full refunds, no question. What we found last year was that in almost every single case, every driver just said, look, just keep the money, let it roll over. And that was a godsend. And if we do, let's hope not, but if we find ourselves in that position again this year, I would very much hope that that spirit would prevail. But there's no question, we've either given full refunds or 100% credit if people are happy with that. So there's no debate about that issue. Thanks very much, Duncan. We look forward to seeing you at the Donington Historic Festival. But before that, we got an event at Brands Hatch on April the 24th and 25th with Equipe Classic Racing. And to tell us more about that event, their other race series and an exciting new super sprint, here's John Pearson.
John, thank you for joining me. Right, tell me about the ethos and the eligibility for Equipe.
Okay, eligibility these days would be easier to say which cars are not eligible for us. We started with one series a few years ago, but actually this year we've introduced a new Libra series, and we'll talk about that in a second. But to run through the three grids that we do, Equipe GTS, which is where we started, is for smaller engined FIA cars under 2.7 litres. So For instance, a Healy 100, which you're leaning on, would be the perfect car to be in that. MGBs, Lotus Elites, TR4s, TVRs, Morgans, and great close racing, because what we don't allow is any sports racers, no Ginetta G4s. Sadly, no Alans. A lot of people would love to bring Alans, but they're a bit too quick for us. When what that gives you is really close, tight, fun racing. And we fill grids with GTS, which again is I think is part of what it's about, because only 3 people are going to be on the podium, and everybody else wants to just get out and have a great race and have a good jostle with people around them. So that's GTS. We then introduced Pre-63, which is quite a known format now, and that has given us a whole new dimension. And a lot of new cars have joined us. Again, it's great for 3-litre Heelys, and that doesn't have an engine size on it, obviously, but it has to be effectively late period E, or I guess very early period F, mostly period E cars, and that's been a success. Last year we introduced the 50s grid, but COVID, of course, took that pretty much away. So what we're doing again this year is we're going to run that as a separate grid within Pre-63. So what it has is it has its own grid sheets, and it has its own prizes, its own trophies and stuff. So it's a race within a race, I guess. And this year we've launched Libra, which, as it says, means kind of a bit of a catch-all for everything. Because what that does do is it then captures some of the big engine Pre-63, P66 cars, and it also gives a second race to our other key races. Now, that's quite a big thing. So a lot of people now, if they're going to go to the extent of going for a race day somewhere, they're going to want to do a second race, rather than just doing one race. So if you're a GTS competitor or a Pre-63 competitor, you can get a second race in Libra. And then it opens up a lot more cars in Libra than we had before. So this year, we've got some Cobras, we've got some Mustangs, we've got some lightweight E-types, we've got some very nice machinery looking forward to coming out with us. And Elans finally have got somewhere to run with us. So there's a few of those lined up. So that looks like being quite fun.
Brilliant. So it's expanding all the time, and you're trying to run separate grids wherever possible.
In fact, at all of our events this year, we're running all those 3 grids.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And now Boris has given us the green light. Has that put the mockers on your first event?
Yeah, I guess it's not going to surprise everybody. Our first event, I mean, we did have a track day booked at Brands Hatch on the 4th of March. I think that was optimistic. It's not going to surprise anybody that the 20th of March at Silverstone has now gone down, unfortunately. But we've now literally today we start refunding people. So if for us, if a race can't happen this year for any reason, we just instantly refund everybody. And we're now looking forward to the first race being a double header at Brands Hatch on April the 24th, 25th. So that's a big meeting for us. Always a very popular meeting, because mostly we do a kind of social evening as well on the Saturday night. So we're hoping maybe there's some form of acceptable distancing, sociability we can do. I don't know. We'll have to see.
So you've got a pretty packed calendar. Now, one of the highlights, we actually came racing with you last year and did the 3-hour relay, which is a brilliant event, and you're better at explaining it than me, really.
Yeah, it's being a relay. I tell you what it does is that we started off. It's interesting because there were no long distance events for old cars in the UK. I mean, there used to be the Burkitt relay has been established for millions of years and is really successful. But more and more now, that is dominated by modern cars with modern brakes, sticky tires. It's not a place for old cars. So we started thinking, how can we do a longer event? And of course, the Spa 6 hours is a legendary thing. And I know you've done it, I've done it. It's just a fantastic thing. But it does rely on one car going out there for 6 hours and with multiple drivers. So we looked at that to start with, and then we went back to the relay. The great thing with the relay is everyone's in their own car, so you can do as much or as little as you like. As it says, one car comes in, one car goes out. A lot of it's to do with teamwork. A lot of it's to do with keeping a pace, changing over quickly. What could possibly go wrong? And everybody starts out, as you know, everyone starts out with a great strategy of, oh, this is how it's going to happen. And then within minutes, it's chaos. But again, it's another great fun, weekend. We deliberately run it between 4 and 7 in the evening, and then at 7 we usually have a live band and start a party up. So that's a kind of nice social thing too.
Yeah, we missed the party last year, didn't we? But
yeah, we missed all the parties last year, so that's a bit of a shame. And you talked about ethos, and it's interesting. I think our ethos is very much club racing, as it kind of used to be. And I guess in the 50s and 60s, you would get passionate amateurs racing fantastic sports cars, and then that's what we do today. We actually don't allow professional drivers into the series. This is an amateur club racing series, and we feel very strongly about some of the core values. We talked about sociability, and I've been racing for quite a long time now, and I did single seaters as well as sports cars, and I've spent a lot of time in paddocks looking around me thinking, oh, I don't really know anybody, and there's nothing organized. And so when we took this over, my partner and I, Rob and I took the original series over because it was failing badly, and we just felt we wanted someone to race. And then I think because we're drivers, we really sculpted the whole thing for us, for the sort of things that we would love to do. So it is one of our values is to have some fun and camaraderie. But I think also importantly, the two other big values are safe driving standards. None of us does this professionally. We all pay for our own cars and our own damage. There's no such thing as totally safe motorsport, but we really try and drum into people that this is not a do or die place. We have a red and a yellow card system, so if anyone comes together, we will look at it. Could it be avoided? We'll give them a yellow card, and too many of those or too many big things, and that will lead to a red card. And we're lucky to be in a position to do it. We have excluded people before now for driving standards, which is a shame, but it's there to protect everybody. The other one for us is car preparation. We are, I guess, we're as passionate about the cars as we are as the racing. So we love beautiful cars, and we like to see cars in period. We don't allow huge sponsor stickers or scruffy cars. We love cars to be as they were in the time.
Yeah, I think, and one of the reasons we love it and we race with you is cost effective. You don't need FIA papers, although you do specify it has to be Appendix K, but it does cut out that expenditure. If people have got their car up to scratch, you don't have the expense of getting the papers, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I think also it's a series and not a championship. So, we've all got busy lives, and again, we're not doing it professionally. None of us is expecting a call up from Ferrari next week. And so you can dip in and dip out. I mean, and then I know you do and others do. You do 3 or 4 events here and one event there, and it suits your calendar and it suits all the budgets too. Because even though increasingly we've got people now, we're into Libre, we're into some bigger cars. We've got people that have decent sized budgets. We can't forget that a lot of our grassroots club racers are saving up to do 2 or 3 events a year. You can't assume that everyone has a mega budget.
No, absolutely. Now, tell me, Super Sprint, what's all that about?
Well, this is the first time we've talked about it, actually, and I mentioned it to you earlier. We've got a day on October the 2nd where we have the whole of Silverstone to ourselves, and this is new for us. We normally buy track time off other people, and this is one of the first times that we've taken a whole day for Equipe for ourselves. And we thought, okay, what can we do with that? What can we do that's different? And we've come up with a format we call the Super Sprint. This is basically a whole day's worth of 10-lap sprints on the Silverstone National Circuit. So everyone should get 5 or 6 10-lap sprints. And so the whole day is going to be and what it'll do is it'll start off with a whole bunch of races with people shuffled around, and then the top half will go one way and the bottom half will go another, and then that will keep going through, and then everybody gets a final as well at the end of the day. So there's masses of track time, there's masses of sort of cups and prizes, and everyone will be shuffling around doing these big sprints, these 10-lap sprints. And so we think that's around Silverstone, that's going to be 12-13 minutes a race, which again, if you think about it, the first 12 or 14 minutes of any race are always the most fun, because everyone's jostling around and doing that. So we're going to reproduce that all day rather than just turning up for sort of one race or one qualifying. So it's something new, and we'll see how it goes. We're trying to make it a little bit of a sort of end of term fun thing, a bit like the 3 hour is in the summer. It's a fun event.
Thanks very much, John. That super sprint event sounds like a great idea, so we'll be certainly looking into that one. Now, for my final interview of this series, I spoke to Hugh Chambers at Motorsport UK, who was talking to me about what they've been doing behind the scenes to get us ready for the restart on the 29th of March, and also what the landscape looks like for historic motorsport. Well, Hugh, I just want to say thank you for joining me today on this programme. It was very kind of you to spare the time.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
As a competitor, and my husband as well, he said, "Oh, you're speaking to Hugh, you must say thank you for the work you've done so far in terms of, us oldies, not having to do a medical every year is fantastic." So yeah, big up for that. Thank you very much.
It was one of those things that just seemed an anomaly. And we're gradually working through all these things that nobody had ever really sort of questioned and challenged. And clearly we needed to go through medical committee and safety committee, and everybody needed to think about it very carefully. And once it had come back and everybody felt comfortable, it was like, great, let's just get rid of this bit of red tape.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it makes it cheaper, and it's all of those things. It's great. So
very good.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions. One of which is, obviously, we're allowed to go racing again from the 29th of March. And just to give you a chance to say what exactly has been going on behind the scenes in the run-up to that release to race.
Well, I think probably the most important thing has been a lot of lobbying with government, and our government department that deals with us is the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, the DCMS, and we've built a very close relationship with them over the last 12 months. And I think what they've seen is that motorsport is extremely well organized. Safety is at the very heart of everything that we do for obvious reasons. And it means that we've got a community that when we issue guidelines and we develop protocols, they're incredibly good at following them. And I think what they've gained from that is a great deal of comfort that we can conduct motorsport even with quite large numbers of people. I mean, a football match, you can go out there and you can, with a few dozen people with some hangers on, you've got a fairly small number of people. But it's certainly, if you want to go circuit racing, you're rapidly into hundreds of people just in order for the event to actually take place. So they had to get comfortable with the scale of what we do, but also combined together with the fact we're usually competing in a very large open air space. That has certainly made it a little bit easier. So dealing with government has been crucial. I think the development of very clear guidelines that we could provide to the community, which we started last year when motorsport actually closed down nearly 365 days ago. It's the 12th of March today. It was the 17th of March last year that we unfortunately put a halt on all proceedings. We restarted again in July, and we had, thankfully, a pretty good summer, and things really ran right through until November, as you know. So we've had experience of going into lockdown, coming out of lockdown, how to manage things, working with all the different home nations, because it's not just DCMS who deal with England, but obviously Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the devolved governments that we have to deal with. So it's that liaison with the community, working with our different committees so that they can be comfortable with the protocols that we're developing, working with the FIA, clearly Appendix S, which some people may be aware of, is really for the high-level international series and has some very demanding requirements on the competitors and the teams. And we fought fairly hard to have some relaxations around that for the historic community, for example, who are finding that the testing protocols that were expected of Appendix S when applied to historic motorsport when we travel overseas were too demanding. So lots of different stakeholder groups, lots of negotiation, lots of persuading people as to how we should be able to operate. And then I think just the execution of it has really been the key thing, and making sure that there's a proper forum where people can voice their concerns, that we get the feedback, and that we then are able to run webinars to train people into the way of doing these things. So a great deal has gone on behind the scenes.
It sounds a huge amount. Yeah. So are we going to be allowed to have the social events such as Silverstone Classic? And what does it actually take for the Motorsport UK to revoke a licence?
Withdrawing a licence is something that we do very reluctantly. It's clearly in everybody's interest that we manage to keep motorsport going absolutely as much as we can. The line in the sand, or I would say probably the solid brick wall, is government legislation. We have to adhere, obviously, to everything that the government lays down, but there are inevitably certain areas that are a little bit more grey than black and white when it comes to legislation. In dealing with the pandemic, the government is developing new legislation the whole time, and it's often legislation which is aimed at one part of society that then has an impact on another part of society. So, as mentioned before, talking with DCMS, how do we figure out how this actually works in practice when it comes, first of all, to sport in general, but then also specifically to motorsport? So what we're always doing is fighting the corner for motorsport to be able to continue, but at the same time bearing in mind the reputational elements of motorsport being conducted in a situation in society where lots of other activities can't go on, and whether it's appropriate. So go back to your original question, what does it take for us to withdraw a permit? We can withdraw a permit without any notice if the government legislation changes and it requires us to do so. But similarly, we can also issue permits at will. It's in our gift. And as the official governing body for motorsport in this country, we're uniquely positioned to be able to issue those permits for four-wheel motorsport.
And so what about the sort of social side, i.e., Silverstone Classic is about getting people together. Is that going to go ahead as we know it, or is it going to be different?
Again, it's entirely down to government legislation as to the size of crowds that are going to be allowed to congregate. The indications at the moment, and I think the government's been very clear on this, is that the unlocking of society will be no earlier than the 21st of June. So they've kept themselves or given themselves the ability to extend it beyond that. I think we all know that the general direction of travel at the moment with the vaccinations and the lockdown is pretty positive. So we seem to be on track for meeting these specific deadlines or gateways, if you like, of timing. And as we're here, as I say, in the middle of March, April, May and June, 3 months away, it doesn't seem unrealistic as we're here now that things will have unlocked by the middle of June.
It definitely feels like things are improving, for sure. So I want to touch on the elite sport exemption rule, which actually was a brilliant idea by the government to allow us to travel to competition during lockdown, but only as long as the event was run by an international body. So great rule, but obviously it left a huge amount of historic events out of the, just outside the door. Do you think things will change going forward?
At the moment, I think if anything, things have got tighter. I think that as we've, if I had to sort of read between the lines of government strategy, I'd say that they want this lockdown to be firm and effective and to ensure that we don't have to come back here. And therefore, if you take, for example, the red list countries, they are immovable on the requirement for travellers from red list countries to quarantine in hotels. Even if you're an elite athlete, there is no exemption for that, for example. In terms of travelling overseas or having a justified reason to travel overseas, then being an elite athlete, which we define as an officially recognised international competition on the FIA calendar, is something that they were comfortable with doing. And I think that's probably, in many ways, it's a greater liberty than a lot of other sports have been able to achieve, particularly those that are on the Olympic pathway. The Olympic environment or Olympic sports environment has a much more tightly defined definition of elite athlete, and probably because that term has not really been used in motorsport before this situation. It's allowed us that bit of negotiation, I think, with the government to find a suitable parameter, and given the FIA is the international federation, an international event that sits on their calendar is something that they felt was a justifiable definition.
Well, I did an interview with the HGPCA a couple of days ago, and they are pretty keen about being elite. And if you've seen the average age of them, they're mostly retired sort of athletes, shall we say.
But you have Masters Championships. If you do triathlons, you can actually race for Great Britain in your 60s. They have age group competitions in triathlons, so it's another question. Probably bowling, lawn bowls.
Oh right, I was going to touch on the Brexit. We've spoken to a lot of the race organisers. We've spoken about carnets and the difficulty, perhaps the hurdles. People are going to stop entering races in Europe. But lots of them seem to think that common sense will prevail and things will calm down. And I guess that's not really going to happen unless someone, we have to renegotiate. The government renegotiates with the EU. And I guess what we need is a governing body who is fighting our corner a bit there. So can you tell us what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, we're definitely fighting the corner. The reality is that, motorsport is but one tiny little tile in the huge jigsaw puzzle of international trade and movements. And, I think I saw the headline this morning in the newspaper that exports from Europe, or was it to Europe, were down 41% in January. This is a process that is being worked out in real time. That whilst the government and the EU reached an agreement in time for the deadline so they could announce that it was all legal and it was completed, none of the detail, I think, was filled in between, and that is an ongoing piece of work. We're working with the Birmingham Chamber of Commerce on a carnet system, and so we have established a reduced price for it, which is good news. And we're working with our insurers as well to see if there's any way in which we can mitigate some of the costs associated with it. So we continue to work on this area, but it's rather like I mentioned before, government legislation takes huge swathes of society and industry and our freedoms with it whenever it's enacted, and you then have to try and carve out exceptions to the rule in the way that we can operate. But I think there's going to be a bit of short-term pain, but I'm sure that before too long, the system will have been worked into something very smooth and very efficient. It's not in anybody's interest, either the EU's or Britain's, to have a sticky system or something with lots of friction in it.
No, I totally agree. But how long do you think it'll take? A year, maybe, or?
I think it would be impossible to answer that with any degree of real accuracy. But I think, if you were guessing, you'd say that it's going to gradually improve through the rest of this year. So I would hope that by 2022, things have really ironed out and are running very smoothly. But the systems are in place now. I mean, you can move equipment between the UK and Europe. It's just there's a few wrinkles along the way.
Yeah, no, this is true. Nothing is impossible. So our friends at Hero did a wonderful report which they released in December on the value of historic motorsport, telling us that the racing industry is some £370 million worth. I just wondered, has that changed the Motorsport UK's view on historic motorsport, or how do you look at us?
Oh, I don't think it's changed it, because we held historic motorsport in the highest esteem beforehand. So I suppose it's further endorsed it and reinforced our position. Motorsport UK in its former iteration, the MSA, has a long history of embracing historic motorsport in the UK. HTPs, historic technical passports for cars, the FIA passports. The UK issues around about 50% of all of the HTPs worldwide. And that gives you some sort of measure of just how big the historic motorsport industry is in this country and how important it is. And, the return to racing last summer and the return to racing in a few weeks' time, leading the charge is historic motorsport. I saw the L'Equipe series just put out an announcement that their event in Brands Hatch in the middle of next month or beginning of May is completely sold out, and they're putting on a second grid. There's a sweet spot in there, isn't there, where for historic motorsport, it's people who've got certainly the passion, they've got wonderful equipment that they want to use, and they've probably got the wherewithal to be able to get out there and use it. They're probably, I think, as you alluded to, at a certain stage in life where perhaps, now that they can really indulge themselves in their hobby.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. Well, thank you very much. And well, maybe we can encourage you to come along and visit one.
Absolutely. No, I'm passionate about it. I mean, as we were talking before, obviously with my family background going back to the 1950s, well, before the war even, my father won his class at Le Mans in an HRG in 1939. So, I've grown up with motorsport all my life. So I'm passionate about every era of motorsport, from the modern going all the way back to the pre-dawn of motorsport.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time, Hugh, and we look forward to seeing you out there.
Fantastic. Great pleasure, and thank you very much indeed.
Well, that wraps up the third and final part of Race and Rally into 2021. I hope you've enjoyed the interviews and found them useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the paddocks or on a racetrack very soon.